Good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are listening from. This is Briar, and I'm recording another episode of Clearing My Bookshelf. Though most of the time I'm not actually clearing my bookshelf as much as buying more books, reading one of the more recent one, and ignoring some of the older books. But I digress. Today's episode is going to be on Elantris, or Elantris. Those might sound the same, might not. But anyway, it's by Brandon Sanderson. It was his first published book, though if I remember from the wiki, it is his 6th book overall that he's written. So my plan today is to give you a summary of Elantris and then talk a little bit about some of its character analysis and just some questions I had about it. The only other context I want to give is I have all sorts of books and I read a lot, but I read a lot of fan fiction and occasionally get imposter syndrome about that. So this year I decided to dip my toes into published fantasy. So recently in 2023, I'm still into Batman fandom, and thanks to the power of memes, I got into Warhammer and can tell you all sorts of Warhammer lore. And somehow this is going to lead to me telling you I decided to give fantasy a shot. So here we are. I want to other housekeeping notes is I want to shout out if you've heard me talk about Elantris in real life. Thank you. If you've been there when I read Elantris, thank you. I often wanted to give up while reading this book, which is maybe not the most reassuring thing to hear going into a podcast episode. And I will just say right now, if anyone is unsure about Elantris and only has 5 minutes or less, I would say Elantris is a book you should read if you like fantasy, and an important and you are completely content reading books where events happen but the characters remain flat. My other housekeeping note for this episode is it may have different levels of editing. I am notoriously bad at editing, and it's not a skill that I possess, but I will be trying this time. I've installed software, so if it goes well, then you might see a family tree, you might see some quotes, and if I want to smash my computer monitor, I will ask my friend to help me and overlay a image over the entire podcast episode length. And I will put a summary note in the description box on which it ended up being. But regardless if it does have edited images or not, it can be enjoyed podcast only. I just got reminded you will hear my cat. I love her dearly. Her name is Luna. She's beautiful, chunky, affectionate. But anyway, you're going to hear her from time to time as we do the podcast. So that's just part of my life, and we're glad to have you for this experience. No, she is not under duress. She just finished eating, and she's letting me know that there's no food out there in her bowl. So she's generally just, when she hears me talk, knows I'm in my bedroom and wants to be in here with me. But if you're wondering why I don't let her in here, she will eat the cords, and when I try to stop her from doing that, she will bite my hand. So she is in the living room. Well, with that wonderful intro, I will get us started on Elantris. So Elantris is broken up. Sorry, I have a Google Doc, so you'll hear me click and switch from Google Doc back into Audacity. Elantris is broken up into 3 different POV characters. And as the book progresses, POV is point of view characters. So it's split between 3 POV characters, and the book is 614 pages long. I have the paperback. I'm not sure if it's an anniversary edition or not, but it's the just a normal paperback. And so each lead gets approximately 200 pages about themselves, though as you get further into the book and it's established the characters, you spend less time. The plot lines are less separate and they start converging on one another. So the plot of Elantris, I'm gonna start by breaking down our 3 POV characters, because the events, I can't give you like a general plot summary because the book goes character 1, character 2, character 3. And I feel very differently about these 3 characters. In my preliminary research, most people like the 3rd POV character the most, Hrathen. Hrathen is spelled Hrathen. Most people like Hrathen the most because he has the most character development. And people find Raoden, Raoden, to be a flat character, and Sarene to be a flat character. Sarene is spelled Sarene. So I will give just a brief rundown. A flat character is what we call characters who the sort of their character development is the same at the beginning of the work as it is at the end of the work. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with a character who's flat and doesn't experience development in a narrative, but it can be personal preference on what kind of characters people like to see in the media that they're consuming. So that's what I mean when I say, or when you hear other people say a character is flat. It just means that their internal development and their characterization isn't going to be fundamentally different at the beginning and the end of the work. So I like to think of the characters in Elantris as the characters, or I should say, POV character 1 and 2, Raoden and Sarene, will remain as flat characters, and they don't change a lot during the book, but we learn more of them, where our 3rd POV character, Hrathen, does experience character development. So I'll go ahead and get into our plot summary, starting with our first POV character, Raoden. So sorry, sometimes it's like, how far do I have to go back to explain? So Elantris takes place. Elantris itself is a city, a magic city, and it is in the land of Aorlon. We're going to workshop this, but it's Arelon. And so what happened was, in the land of Arelon, we're going to do that, like a melon, Arelon. Anyway, so it's probably like Aorlon, anyway, we're going to do Arelon. Point being, so in the kingdom of Arelon, there's a city full of people who are endowed with magic, and the city is called the titular Elantris, Elantris. So what can happen is you can wake up one day and you have gone through a magic shift, which is called the Shaud, SHAOD. I'm not going to use that because it's sort of an unwieldy fantasy term. I'm just going to call it like the magic change or the change. So what happens is that you can wake up and you can have gone through the change. you literally, your skin starts glowing, your hair changes white. And when that happens, you're taken to Elantris, and the Elantrians are treated sort of as deities or above human, or not I'm just overthinking a little. The Elantrians are seen as like not quite gods, not quite humans, somewhere in between. And so it was great to be an Elantrian until 10 years ago, before the story started. There was something called the Reod, Reod, which like fucked everything up. So the Elantrians, like instantly they changed, and like where their skin had been silver glowing and their hair had been luminous and silver, they got black spots, and their hair fell out, and they like physically aged on the outside. And the Elantrians were sort of ruling this area, this kingdom, Arellan. And when the magic like got fucked up, there was essentially not quite a civil war, but there was like an overthrowing of the Elantrians, and a monarchy was established. Put a pin in that. So since the fall, we're going to call it the fall instead of the Reod, because that's an unwieldy fantasy term. So since the fall of Elantris, people are still going through the magic change, but instead of the magic change turning them into Elantrin, but that's really good, it turns them into Elantrins who are they're essentially described as diseased, is, I would say, the concise way of getting across what the book is saying, with the spots and the hair falling out and the rapid aging. We'll find out a little more about what physical changes this does to a person, but that's our general summary. So TLDR, Elantris, super cool, super magic. 10 years ago, got fucked up. We had the fall of Elantris, and the monarchy was established in Arellan. Now, just because Elantrin... So, how do people become Elantrins, you might ask? It's just RNG, random number generated. It's just random. So, people are still waking up and having gone through the change, but that's changed derogatory now, since we're after the fall of Elantris. So, what happens is if you wake up and you've gone through the change, which is called the Shaod, Shaod. Again, shout out for my two friends who have heard me talk about Elantris, and shout out to anyone who helped me say these words when I was reading, because I personally disliked the unwieldy fantasy names. But anyway, if you wake up and you've gone through the change, whoever found you takes you to the priests, and the priests do burial rites on you, and then they throw you into the city of Elantris. The city of Elantris is sort of in the middle of Arellan. Well, that's not true. Elantris is surrounded by 4 cities, 1 north, south, east, and west. And most of the plot is going to happen in the capital city of Arellan, which is Kai, Kae. So if you have gone through the change, they're going to throw you into Elantris. And if you're wondering why don't people just leave, Elantris has very, very high walls. The cover of Elantris, the book, is what I believe to be the gates around the city of Elantris. And so there are very tall walls, and there are gate guards with swords. That's why people don't leave. Now, with me explaining the city of Elantris, I can get into our 3 characters and then get into our plot summary. So, our first POV character is Raoden, Raoden. And Raoden is the Prince of Arelin. So he wakes up, not a good day for him. He's gone through the change. So he's going to get his ass tossed into Elantris. Since a lot of the characters in this book are flat, I'm going to tell you what I think are their defining character traits. Read a couple of quotes I've picked for them from the book, and then get into their plot summary. Just because, since I'm not going to really focus in on their internal development or their characterization, since it stays consistent, I'd rather just sort of front load it so that you can get a sense of the character, and then I'll tell you sort of their plot beats so you can kind of better understand why they do what they do and things like that. So, our quotes for Raoden is, he says, quote, "Give a man an honest choice, and I believe they'll choose wisely." Another quote, this quote is from Serene, our next POV character, and she says this about Raoden. "Serene knew that face somewhere, that pure belief in the basic goodness of all men." And our last quote is a quote by Raoden, in which the people of Elantris are living in pretty dismal conditions. And he says, "Joy was more than just an absence of discomfort." So I'll give a little context on why I picked these quotes for him, starting with the last. Joy was more than just an absence of discomfort. When Raoden is in Elantris, Elantrians don't need to eat or sleep. They aren't killed by grievous injury, but if they are hurt, they will not heal. Their bodies do not heal, and they will feel pain. And so a lot of Raoden's part of the book is just getting Elantrians to sort of have a quality of life. And they've cleaned the city, or part of the city, and then he's trying to give people purpose. And that's when he says that joy is not the absence of discomfort. That I'm not saying he's saying Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but he's sort of saying just because the physical has been met, that doesn't mean that someone's happy. Raoden is constantly being noted as an optimist in the book, and he will be noted for not kind of settling for the bare minimum. He does want the people under him or in his rule to have a level of quality of life and happiness. Why did I choose give men an honest choice, and I believe they will choose wisely, is because Raoden did grow up as a prince, and I'll get into his father's ruling style when we go over Serene, but Raoden believes in people's ability to really, not quite like self-determination and like a government structure, but he does believe that people will do what's in their best interests, and that people aren't just trying to screw each other over. And the quote I pulled where Serene talks about Raoden, where she says, quote, that pure belief, Serene knew that faith somewhere, that pure belief in the basic goodness of all men, is because even later in the book, she's able to spot Raoden in disguise, because out of all the characters in the narrative, he is an optimist, and he is seeing the best in everything, and he is trying to make the best out of horrible situations, even when he himself admits that things are really bad in his internal monologue. So that's our sort of personality overview for Raoden. Let me give you his plot summary. So, Rowden undergoes the change and he's thrown into Elantris. Now, Elantris is a beautiful city, but problem, Elantris has been powered by magic. So, when the fall of Elantris happened, a lot of the magic stopped working in the city or is severely diminished. For the most part, the magic has just stopped. So the city, which had been pristine, is now covered in slime, unidentifiable slime and ooze just everywhere. It's very dirty. There's no lighting. It's paved. So Rowden is thrown into Elantris, where he meets Geladon, Galladon, and Rowden bribes Geladon with his food to be his guide in Elantris. Elantrians do not need to eat, but they do feel hunger. And there is no food in Elantris. The only food that comes into Elantris is the corn that comes with the burial rites. Put a pin in it. That will be important later in just a couple minutes. So, I moved in my Google Doc and lost my place. Oh, okay. So, Rowden in Elantris wants to work with Geladon, as Geladon becomes Rowden's right-hand man very quickly. Geladon, I was obsessed with him, but he's a pessimist, a cynic. He thinks people will screw each other over as soon as possible. Basically, anything I said about Rowden's positive qualities, Geladon believes the opposite. And it's kind of like makes sense where he's coming from. But anyway, I love Geladon. But he doesn't come off as insufferable. Rowden is very much on the far extreme side of optimism. So Geladon is a nice kind of palate cleanser. So they sort of meet in the middle. It doesn't come off as insufferable. I think Geladon, or at least for me, was very likable. So Rowden sees Elantris covered in slime, and because of the change and since it rapidly ages you, he does not look like the prince. Well, he does, but nobody can recognize him. So Rowden's goal is in Elantris, there are 3 sort of gangs, is what Sanderson calls them, but there are 3 groups vying for power. And Rowden wants to create a stable territory inside of Elantris. He wants to find a way to provide food to the Elantrians, provide shelter, including clothing. The Elantrians are thrown into the city with the clothes on their back and no shoes. So he wants to provide shelter, food, clothing, a stable territory, and he wants to give people a purpose in Elantris. So Rowden's idea is that once I have given the material needs to Elantrians, the only way for us to forget the pain that we're in is to have a purpose. So why do I say that? Remember, I mentioned it briefly, is that once an Elantrian is damaged or hurt physically, they cannot heal. So early on, Rowden stubs his toe, and for him, it's like a pain that will not go away, and he'll be constantly reminded of it. And so what happens to a lot of the Elantrians is most of them only last a year inside before they go through the Hoed, Hoed. I'll have to come up with something clever to call that. But basically, at some point, they just can't anymore. I think that's what I'll say. The Elantrians just take too much damage, and they just start saying the same phrase over and over again and moaning in pain. So Rowden's idea is that if people have purpose, then it will distract them from their hunger and their bodily pain. And through that, they will be able to fight off the sort of inevitable rambling end with no end that the Elantrians go through. There is a brief discussion about why people don't like put Elantrians, why they don't like put other people against their out of their like misery, essentially. I'm struggling a little bit of how to put that eloquently in a way that doesn't just sound like execution, but the answer that the book gives basically is we don't know what the soul is, so we're afraid that if we kill an Elantrian, like by immolating them or beheading them, that we fuck up their eternal soul. So it's better for us just to kind of leave them in the street in incredible pain. So, with that side note explained, that is Rowden's. This is what his POV is going to be about. It's going to be, how do I make Elantris a better place? Now, I very much dislike Rowden's chapters. The book is going to give us a chapter of Rowden, a chapter of Serene, a chapter of Rathen, until the plot line starts converging. And I can tell you that nearly every time I got to a Rowden chapter, it was absolute dramatics, as I did not want to read it, and I complained about it. And every time I got to a Rowden chapter, I considered skipping it, like I did with the Cousins chapters in Eldest, which is part of the Aragon series by Christopher Paolini. So I wanted to skip Rowden's chapters, or I wanted to just stop reading the book wholesale, which is not good if you just want to stop reading the book. Why? Rowden's, and I don't know if this is just, it hasn't aged well, or if this was a problem on the release of Elantris, but Rowden's Rowden's arc reads a lot to me as, oh, have you tried not being poor? So he's thrown into Elantris, and when he first tries to start getting people to join his side, he comes across some people, and he's like, he succeeds in like being charismatic, and so they follow him, and he says, hey, you're an artisan, and they're like, yeah, I am, and he's like, can you make shoes? And he asked the woman, like, can you make clothes? So why I'll give you another example before I tell you why this irks me so much. All the Elantrians are thrown into the city with corn, and the corn specifically has to be viable corn that can be planted to produce crop. So Rowden then says, hey, I'm going to plant this corn. Why do I dislike Rowden's plot? Because it basically is saying that the Elantrians have been here for some of them for 10 years, but you're saying that people from all over this kingdom are thrown into Elantris and no one else has thought of these things. You're telling me that people who make shoes and clothing for a living don't think to do that. And what was egregious to me is that Rowden tells Geladon, like, oh, we're going to plant this fucking corn. And then we don't find out for like 100 or some pages or some shit. Geladon is a fucking farmer. Geladon is a farmer. So the book is doing the thing where it wants us to think that Rowden is very smart and everyone around him is in awe of his intelligence and his ideas and all this sort of thing. And all I can marvel at is, why did no one else think of this? There's a plot point that I'm not going to get too into because all you really need to know about Rowden's chapters until they converge is that he's giving people their basic needs: food, shelter, clothing, and then he's trying to find people a purpose. There's literally a plot point with one of the rival groups where Rowden knows who this person is because they're a noble outside, or they were a noble. And sorry, that's not true. They were like a stonemason. And Rowden is like, oh, like, you have taken on the mask of madness and tyranny, and you've not yet looked at the beautiful stonework that could never be witnessed if we weren't here in Elantris. And think of what you could do, restoring these and making your own. And then the person is like, by God, you're right. Like, I am surrounded by such beauty. And I'm sure that this is meant to show, like, Rowden can resolve things diplomatically, and he can do lateral thinking, and he's charismatic. What it reads to me as is, I wonder less with how smart Rowden is and more how dumb is everyone around Rowden. If, again, I want to remind you, he told a stonemason, have you considered using that skill? He told a weaver, have you considered making cloth? He told a farmer, hey, we're gonna plant some fucking corn. Like, I understand that the book is trying to highlight to us that the change is just basically a death sentence, and so most people, especially once they get thrown into the slime covered city, just sort of stop hoping. And Rowden is there to kind of be hope for people and to make that happen. But it just makes me think, like, I understand, I really do, that, like, I really understand that the characters don't want to be in Elantris, and it is horrible, but, like, there's no way that you could get me to buy, because these aren't the only farmers. Geladon isn't the only farmer who's gotten thrown into Elantris. One of the characters isn't the only weaver, isn't the only shoemaker. And you're telling me nobody before Rowden tried to improve their material conditions? It just is absurd to me, because the city has been around for 10 years, and it pulls from literally all social strata. So make it make sense. It really feels, I don't want to say contrived, but it just feels like a glaring plot hole. And I would have been satisfied even if Sanderson just explicitly gave an answer, even if it was lackluster. Like, if he was, but he doesn't. So it just baffles me. It baffles me, and I'm still not over it. And every time I think of this book, I'm not going to get over this. Also, my understanding or my reading of the text, you are welcome to let me know in the comments if I am incorrect, but my reading of the text was that Rowden is white, and Geladon is, I read him as black. He's just described, Geladon is racially ambiguous in that way that fantasy characters can be. He's a larger brown man from a desert country but he's on the border of a country that's like forested, like Irelin is forested. So I read him as black. And not a different sort of ethnic group. He is described as brown, so we do know Geladon is is a person of color. But it you know, how do you say what somebody's ethnic grouping is explicitly in a fantasy work when you're not using the countries that we know in real life? So all of that is to say, part of the reason that his power bothers me is because he's a white man who comes into the city and has a brown man explaining how things work. And Rowden tells the brown man, who is a farmer, oh, dog, we are going to plant some corn. Like, it just reads badly to me. And I 100% do not think it's an intentional thing on Sanderson's part. But it just gives... Rowden kind of gives a little white savior. So with a combination of... And that's, of course, my interpretation of Rowden and the text, right? So just for me personally, that's also why I'm not a fan of Rowden, is just because it gives, I'm smarter than you, be awed by that. And it does that by making everyone around him dumber. It gives white savior as a treat, and it also gives, oh, have you tried not being poor? So that is our Rowden overview until the plots converge. Our second POV character is my favorite of the three POV characters, Serene, Sarene. Serene is from the next door. Okay, so where Elantris is right on the coast. So to the north of Elantris, across the sea, is Todd. I read it as Todd, but it's Teod. Teod? It might be Teod. I just read it as Todd, to be honest. But she is the princess. I'm just, you know what? Again, it's probably Teod or Teod. I'm just going to read it how I read it to you in my head, which was Todd. So she is in a political marriage with Rowden. Problem, Rowden undergoes the change right before they're supposed to get married. And in her marriage contract, it says that, like, once they signed the contract, it was legally binding as them married. And it doesn't stop. They don't stop being married just because one of them died. So Serene's plot is going to be about her fixing the government of Arellan. Before I explain to you why the Arellan government needs to be fixed, I'm going to give you sort of the central thrust of her character. So the thing you need to know about Serene is she's smart, but I feel like it comes across without making everyone around her seem dumb. And she's politically savvy. And those are her main character traits. The main... well, maybe not her main characterization, but I think what she feels acutely and is noted by characters other than what I've mentioned is that she feels unloved. Serene feels that because she is exceptional, because of her upbringing and her strong character, and because of the strengths I've listed, that she's unlovable. That the people around her put her on a pedestal, and then when that happens, she can't have anybody who sees her as a peer, and she hasn't found anyone who loves her romantically. The text does explain this through friends, but makes it pretty clear. I'm not like reaching. It explicitly states she hasn't found somebody who loves her romantically. And that this really bothers her and is something that it is one of the many reasons she is saddened by Rowden's death, because they had been exchanging letters and talking through their magic walkie-talkies during the engagement period, and they had started to fall in love with each other. So part of her story is dealing with, she had reached a point where she thought she had found somebody who loved her, and they've died, and now she's sort of remembering her unlovable state. Before I give you the quotes, I'll give you some of her physical description, only because the book often reminds us of Serene's physical description, and I don't know if that's just something I notice more in Serene's than the other two POV characters, or if, well, I was going to say if it's a gender thing. It might come up more, not because if Serene is the only female lead character. Actually, her appearance might come up more because what she's wearing is a plot point, because the clothing, the sartorial, that's a fun word, sartoril. But anyway, because if she's in mourning clothes or not, and how extravagant her clothes are or aren't, or the length of skirts versus, skirt and trouser, that sort of thing, is used to show her political activeness and her political stance. So that could be why her physical description comes up more than the other characters. So let me now you the quotes I pulled about Serene is one about her lovability and one about her affection. So the one that I have that would back up, this is, from her internal monologue about how she feels unlovable after Rowden's death, that she won't find another romantic partner. She says in her internal monologue, quote, "She had grown up without affection outside of her family, and it appeared she would continue that way," end quote. A lot of Serene's, sorry, I'm switching over to her political savviness. A lot of the narrative points out it's not only that she knows what to say, but she's astute at noticing things about other people and being able to observe and then speak. And that Serene is sort of cerebral and looking to do social engineering. And so when Rowden in disguise, we'll cover it later, but when Rowden is in disguise, the people around have known him longer, but it is only actually Serene who notices that this is Rowden. Okay, we won't really get into what she does know Rowden more than, it's a whole thing. All you need to know is there's a reason that she spent more time with them, even though he was quote unquote dead because he was in Elantris. We'll get to that later. But the quote to say that she's observant is, Rowden says about Serene, quote, "The others hadn't noticed the change, but Serene, dear suspicious Serene, hadn't been so lax." So I will say, is Elantris the greatest romance I've ever read in my life? Absolutely not. Is Elantris a bad romance? No. I would say Elantris is like a 5. It's not a romance book. I would say Elantris is above serviceable, but it's not great in the romance department. I think it's satisfactory. I think it's, sort of like Greek yogurt with homemade granola and honey. Now, if you don't know me in real life, that sounds super good. I want you to know I'm being more positive. I'm not saying I can't cook. I'm saying I'm learning to cook. So even if something sounds complex, when I make it, it's on the simpler side. But each man in his own pace. Point being, what am I saying about the romance? I think that if I was going to call their romance a brand at the grocery store, I would say they're Safeway Select, Signature Select, their store brand. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, a lot of it is the same as everything else. It's just in generic packaging. It's good. It's not exceptional or great or anything. So I do like the romance. Is it going on my list of like top 10 couples of all time in top 10 canon couples of all time? No. And off the top of my head, I can't even tell you who confirmed couples is on the top of that list, because my brain says Otacon and Snake, and Otacon and Snake are not confirmed romantic or sexual partners, no matter how much I want them to be. So anyway, I also love Metal Gear. So all my brain is pulling right now is like Yuna and Tidus from Final Fantasy X, or Jesus, I'm just thinking of stuff that's on my bookshelf. Mina Harker and her husband in Dracula. Mostly because her husband is like very supportive and Mina is a girl boss. But I don't have a lot of other stuff on my desk that I can think of. Point being, not the highlight of the romance I've ever seen, but it's a solid romance. Now, I will actually get back on topic and tell you about Serene. So, Serene comes to Arellan to get married to Rauden, as I mentioned earlier, but he's quote unquote dead. They say he's dead instead of he's become an Elantrin. Death is a preferable state in Arellan. So this is the plot line where we find out that the monarchy is newly established. It was only 10 years ago when Rauden's father, King Iadon, Iadon, took the throne. And when King Iadon took the throne, he decided that the nobility would be based off of money. And so this causes a lot of instability in Arellan, because every couple times a year they pull like the tax report for everyone, and your status in the nobility can and does get yanked based on where you fall, including the kingship itself. So when Elantris fell, Elantris, because it was magic. Oh, so you might wonder, why does Elantris not have food? Presumably they used to. It's because before the fall of Elantris, the magic was what was letting them produce food. But after the fall of Elantris, well, the magic isn't working, so there's not food anymore. So that's the answer to that question. So how the cities, remember, Elantris is in the center, and then there's a north, south, east, and west city. So the city where the capital city, Kai, Kae, was full of merchants and tradespeople, because the people in Elantris could use magic for all their basic goods. So the people in the next town were for luxury goods, essentially. So when King Iadon, King Idan? Let's do Idan. No, that's a different spelling. That'd be like Eidan. Anyway, when maybe it is Idan, like A, because it's Iadon. The A could be silent. It could be Idon, Don. We're going to do King Idon because that's easier than me saying Eadon. No, we'll keep Eadon because that's how I read it. Okay. When King Eadon took the throne 10 years ago after the fall of Elantris, he got rid of private ownership of land, and he made a bunch of merchants and tradespeople into serfs on land to do agriculture work. People don't like this because they don't know how to do agricultural work, and they now live in poverty and have no rights. So the people of Arellan are generally unhappy. And so Serene takes over where Rauden left off before he was turned into an Elantrian, which is Rauden has a group of nobles that... Sorry, I was thinking in the future. of this episode. Brandon has a group of nobles where he was working on ways to sort of stabilize the civil unrest. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these people, and here's why. Elantris has a lot of characters, and the characters I could describe all of them to you. There's enough detail to do that, but it's really not worth it because they're described in the beginning with a lot of detail, but you don't need all that detail. So I will kind of just give you a brief overview of the tropes that the group of dissenters has. TV Tropes calls them the rebels. I think maybe that's too firm. Maybe at the end, but no, I think that rebels implies more activity than they actually have. Or more action than they do. So I just called them the group. So in the, cause it was just Serene's POV. So it's just like Serene and the group, you know? So, Serene has a whole family tree, by the way. I will tell you a little bit about the Serene family tree. And if I figured out how to edit, I will insert a picture around the section of the family tree so you can see. But Serene's uncle, Kin, Kiin, lives in Kai with his wife and their 4 kids. I'm even now, and this again is the thing with Elantris, I could tell you about these characters, surely I really could, but they don't always necessarily come up. So all I want you to know, okay, I'll tell you who they are, but only because we're going to need to know later at the very end. And even then, I'm going to keep it brief. So in Serene's family tree, you have her uncle, Kin. You have the oldest son, Lukul. Lukul is the closest friend that Rowden has. You have the second son, Aiden, Adien. And then you have the twins, with the son being Daorn, Daorn, and Kais, Kaise. So I just want you to know Serene has family in Kai, but we will not talk any more about them unless they become plot relevant, which they are ish later. Okay, let me go back to telling you who. So there are more supporting characters for Serene. Let me tell you about them. You have the group, which, again, they all have names, and if you read Elantris, absolutely, you'll get the names, no problem. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to refer to the group members by the archetype that they're mostly consisting of. So you have the old mentor. You have the rival of the old mentor, who's also old. You have... Do you ever think of the archetype and there's no good way of saying it? You have exotic, other, hot, new money. And I'm trying to think of what trope to break him down to. We're going to call him... We're going to use his name. Well, okay. If I'll come up with a name if I need to refer to him again. Now, sorry, there's a lot. I have a lot of thoughts about this. Similar with Gelid, and I don't think Sanderson is racist. I will say that. I just wonder if it was unintentional or if it's just the cultural osmosis of previous works that's come before you. This character, his name is Shuden. I might just use his name just to not have to use such long tropes. Shuden has a similar problem. I shouldn't say problem. I don't know what race Shuden is supposed to be. He is also from another country in the world. And I read Shudon as black / Middle Eastern, like sort of Morocco or like Northern African coast. But when I was on TV Tropes, they read him as Chinese coded or East Asian coded. So there's three things to note about. 3 things. 1, it's hard again to pinpoint race in fantasy. Which might, well, I don't want to give Sanderson too much credit. I mean, if an author goes very much overboard in racial stereotypes, then it's easy. But I couldn't tell you definitively what race Shudon is supposed to. Oh, Shuden is supposed to be. My other thoughts are gone, and that is probably okay. Shuden race is not a racial stereotype. I'm horrible at knowing the races of characters, even if it's very clear to everyone else. There's a very well-known influential book in America that's often read in schools called To Kill a Mockingbird. And To Kill a Mockingbird is a commentary about racial relationships when it was written. I had really bad reading. Well, I had not the best reading comprehension when I was younger. Even though I read a lot, I wasn't, and I suppose in that respect, I'm still not always the greatest at understanding what group a person is if it's not explicitly stated. So, To Kill a Mockingbird is partially or mostly a discussion about race relationships between white people and black people in America. And the main POV family is white, and they're defending a black man who was accused of a crime. And when I was young, and the main family gets a lot of ire drawn towards them because they're standing up. I shouldn't say that, because they're doing lawyer work for a black man. I am so bad at understanding race. I assumed the main family was black and the guy they were defending was white. So, and this did not get challenged at all because my teacher never explicitly said it was about race, because it was middle school and I grew up in a Republican area, and they were like, it's so clear, we don't need to say it explicitly. All's that to say is, I'm not the greatest at telling what race characters are supposed to be if it is not explicitly stated in the text itself. So, take that what you will. A recap. The group, Serene and the group. So you've got Serene, you've got the old mentor, the rival of the old mentor, Shuden, and the army captain. Head of the army. He's the head of the army. Well, he's like technically it's like a mercenary force, and then when it became a monarchy, he kind of like became official, but it's a little murky. So we'll call him the head of the army. We'll call him the head of the army. So Serene, let me go back to my Google Notes. That's her main. Serene's, to recap the section, Serene's main thrust is to get King Iadon either better at ruling or to fix the civil unrest, or to just get him off the throne. It's less about that initially, and it's more just trying to like stabilize the government. And we come to our last POV character, Rathren. And so we have to take a little detour And we've got to talk about religion, baby. So, there are 3-ish main religions in the setting. And they all have the same prefix, SHU. And so I'm not going to say the prefix every time, and that's a lot how the book does it. They just drop the prefix unless a character is speaking kind of formally. So there's 3 main... It basically was one religion or one founder. They don't get too into the history of the religion. And after they died, of course, people are going to have different interpretations. And so the main religion in the setting broke into 3 branches, which are mostly physical or dependent on where you are geographically. So there's Keseg, Keseg. It will only come up a couple times in the book. Shuden is under this school because of where he comes from geographically. You have the Korathi, Korathi, and that's what Irelin and Todd are. And you have the last branch is called Derathi or Dareth, Dereth. And that is the branch that the Empire uses. Now, if you've been around the block for narrative, sorry, let me adjust. You'll probably hear my chair a little, take a moment. I could pause this recording, but I am living my best life. I'm getting my robe. It is a little chilly in my room. And thank you for that break. I am almost ready to continue to tell you about Elantris. Okay. If you are used to media, you can tell that someone or a group being called the Empire, it probably means they're bad. So, there is a brilliant quote that summarizes the theological differences between these whole groups. If I figured out how to edit, I will post it on the screen. And if not, you just get to hear my beautiful voice and my darling cat, Luna, tell you about these 3 branches. So, this is a quote from Shuden, and he's talking to Serene about how he is sort of baffled that the religion split into 3. He says, quote, Keseg taught of unity, but what did he mean? Unity of mind, as my people assume, unity of love, as your priest claims, or unity of obedience, as the Derathi believe. In the end, I am left to ponder how mankind managed to complicate such a simple concept. So, our last POV character, Rathan, is part of the Derathi branch of Keseg. And Derathi is got a military bend to it and is the religion of the Fjord Empire, Fjord, like the land feature of Fjord, or like the critical role character from Campaign 2, played by Travis Willingham. So, something to tell you about the Fjord Empire. They are a colonial power in that they will invade other lands, forcibly convert them to Derathi, and then incorporate them into the army as subjects. Elantris doesn't get into how the Empire functions or what its citizenry is or sort of the real intricacies of colonialism, but the Empire is an invading and occupying force, and they are using religion as their justification for their power expanding. Okay. The other thing I want you to know about religion in Elantris is because Derathi has this military angle to it, our last point of view character, Rathan, Hrathen. He is noted consistently through the book as wearing red armor. And this is going to be a huge plot point later. Because how we, the reader, understand this, because we know his internal monologue, and how the characters in the narrative interpret the Dorethi priest wearing armor is very different. So, let me tell you about Hrathen. And, see, Serene's quotes are interesting because her quotes are the only ones that really talk about what she lacks, or more like negative characteristics, such as she doesn't feel loved and that she's suspicious, where Rowden is very positive, very optimistic characteristics. And Hrathen's characteristics aren't as positive as Rowden's, but they certainly aren't like negative, like they don't have negative connotations like Serene's does. So, our quotes about Hrathen's character. He might lack sorry. For context, this is talking about how he goes about trying to Hrathen's plot in a large sense is he has come to Arellan and he has 3 months to convert the populace or else ... So his approach is stated as he might like his approach to conversion is, in his sermons, is he might lack passion, but he had an ample serving of determination. So Hrathen's main, and we'll see this a lot at the end of the book. This quote is from page 14, so about 2/3 through. But the determination that Hrathen does is his most defining characteristic. Our other quote about Hrathen, we'll come back to it. Let me get you a little bit of his plot, then I'll give you the supporting quote. So, Hrathen is what's called a Gyorn, a Gyorn of Dorethi. We're not going to use the word Gyorn just because it's kind of annoying. We're just going to call him like a high priest. Sure. Why? Because there's going to be a priest and it's going to be easier that way. So, he needs to convert the people of Arellan to Dorethi, or if he doesn't do that in 3 months and convince the monarchy to make Dorethi the official religion and convert, then the Fjordan Empire will invade. When Hrathen was younger, he was tasked with the same sort of mission in Dula, where Galadon is from, but he was less successful there. So it was like a very violent forced conversion, and sort of that left a mark on Hrathen that he doesn't want to see repeated in Arellan. So his mission is to convert. I use convert in like air quotes, right? Because it's being used as a political technology by the Empire. But I could go on for a while on that. Suffice to say that because of Hrathen's past experience in Dula, he does not want Arellan to be invaded. He just wants them to all convert. I don't agree. Well, anyway. Okay, so Hrathen has 2 characters who are diametrically opposed to him. And so Hrathen is in a battle of wits with Serene. They're both trying to maneuver the nobles politically to gain favor. So Serene does belong to Karathi, though she is religious, but it's not a religion that's as focused on sort of firm structures, whereas Dorethi is described to us in the book as basically a religion pyramid scheme. So, for example, if you're a high priest, you want a priest under you. The priest can have people who are under him. They don't get a title. Well, they do. That's not true. There's a unwieldy fantasy term, but I'm just not using them. So basically, like, when you're converted into Dorethi, you know what your position is, and you know who's above you, and you know who's above them, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth, all the way to the head of the Fjordan Empire. So I have a note that just says Dorethi is a religious MLM. So Hrathen is opposed in his religious conversion of Arelin by Dilaf. It's like Pilaf with a D, D-I-L-A-F. Both Dilaf and Hrathen want to convert Arelin, but Dilaf is very fiery. And so Dilaf he almost gives like character. If you've seen like a movie or a piece of media that has like a really fiery, charismatic priest type who's very animated, and sort of yells, that's how I interpreted Dilaf when I was reading. So Dilaf is Hrathen's opposite, not in the religion itself, but in the approach that they have. So my quote about Hrathen's approach is because at some point, one of the Karathi priests says, Hrathen, knew you when you were younger, and you've lost some of your faith. And so this sends him into a little existential tailwind for a while. Before this is where Hrathen kind of ends after his tailwind, about his faith. His quote, "He was not a zealot. He would never be a man of extreme passion. In the end, he followed Dorethi because it made sense. That would have to be enough." And Hrathen is often the most important. Hrathen's most often is the most often liked protagonist out of the three, because where Rauden is the same person at the end and the beginning, and so is Serene, Hrathen isn't. He starts the book very much following Doreth and really, really harping on its structure and on his mission. He then goes into his sort of middle period where he questions his faith. He comes out saying, I am who I am, and I'm not fiery and emotional like Dilaf is, and I'm never going to be that way, but by God, am I gonna fucking convert this country so they're not invaded. And he'll actually end the book in a very different place, but I won't spoil that. So I want to clap, but I don't want to mess up the mic, so I'll do a little clap there. It either picked it up or didn't. I see a little spike, but I will now give you the TLDR on our three characters and then get you to the end of the book. I know this is a lot. I know we're I know we're an hour and 15 minutes almost into this book. And the setup is just finished. And I'm going to get to where all the plots converge. The downside of having three POV characters is that the setup for Elantris' climax and finale isn't done until 400 pages. And that also can make it a tough read if you don't like one of the POV characters. Once you sort of split into once they start converging, the POV chapters are much shorter as they intertwine. But when you're going through the setup, if you do not like one of the characters, it is difficult. So here's our TLDR. Rauden is Prince of Arelin, goes through the change, turned into an Elantrian, which is bad because they are covered in black spots, physically age. They feel hunger but have no food to eat, and they don't heal from physical injury. He wants to and succeeds in making a group in Elantris, providing them with food, shelter, and clothing, while energizing people to find purpose in daily tasks such as cleaning. Oh, fuck. Okay, you have to know this or else the rest of the book won't make sense. Rowden finds books about magic because there's books in Elantris still. And he starts studying Aondor, Aondor. Sorry, Aondor. And that's the magic system that is used in Elantris and I believe in the other Cosmere novels. Brandon Sanderson has different novels that are connected to each other. Some are direct series and some are like loosely connected. So the Cosmere is books that share a cosmology in a grander sense with Elantris. I haven't read any of the other ones at this moment, but I think the Aondor is important. So, Rowden does study the Aeon, is what it's called. Anyway, Aeon is what the magic system is called, Aon. And he's trying to figure out why doesn't magic work anymore? And how do we make magic work? Spoiler alert, he's going to succeed. Why is he going to succeed? He kind of... It's unclear if Rowden is specially endowed with something inherently or if it's just like protag syndrome where like he just, of course, chosen one kind of stuff. Okay, Serene, her TLDR, she's the Princess of Todd. She's in a political marriage with Rowden, the Prince of Arellen. Since Rowden is quote unquote dead, Serene still has political authority as the princess of, or as the wife of Rowden, son of the king. There's political unrest in Arellen because King Iadon is really bad at leading and seized all private government and private property and made people into serfs. And Serene works with a group of dissenting nobles to fix it. Last but not least, we have Hrathen. Hrathen is trying to convert all of the people of Arellen. I mean, I say people, but it's mostly the king and the nobles because they have the political power and not the serfs. But I digress. Hrathen is here to convert the people to Dureth so that they are not invaded by the Fjordan Empire. Now, the plots converge. Okay, anyway. I have finished the character notes. I'm on page 3 of 6 on my notes. Okay, so Rowden consolidates power in Elantris. I already went over that. Don't need to repeat that. So, this is how the plots start converging. After Serene has to do acts of piety to show her deep feeling about being a widow. So Hrathen and Delof try to position Elantrians as causing the discord that the people are suffering. Which is a result of King Iadon, but they're trying to make the Elantrians the scapegoats. So Serene counters this move by using her widow's trial to provide food and clothing to the Elantrians. So this is how Serene meets Rowden. Rowden kind of is the face of the Elantrians in the negotiations. And Rowden, when he's getting the collections of items, he actually squirrels away more for his own faction. We have Rowden's POV, so we know he's like justified in this, but Serene doesn't have his POV. So she's hurt deeply by this betrayal as she had started to fall for Rowden, who's using an alias, but It makes sense, but it's so dumb, but it's charming, but it's dumb. I will not actually tell you. It's not like a spoiler, technically, but I will not tell you what his alias is and why I have such fond dumbness over it. I think you should experience it yourself. But after Serene finds out that Rowden is taking more supplies for himself, she feels deeply hurt. As she had started to feel for him romantically. Rowden instantly, of course, knows that's Serene and is in love with her. She's even better than through letter and talking to her through magic walkie-talkie. Serene stops giving supplies because one of the enemy factions that is hungrier, who isn't growing corn, basically attacks the nobility when they go one day. So she has to stop giving the food to the people, lest it be used as a way of showing, lest it be used by Rathan and Delof as a way that's showing that Elantrians are the scapegoats they're trying to make them. Okay. Rathan has a religious crisis, but when he comes out on the other side, assured of his faith in Dareth, he is going to get poison, okay, TLDR. Rathan has two conflicts. His conflict politically with Serene and his approach to religion with Delof. More of his problems come from Delof because, remember, Dareth is a religious MLM. And because Delof is more charismatic and he's been in Arellan longer, he lives there. So he has more people in his line, there's a term in MLM, but anyway, basically Delof has a bigger team than Rathan, and Delof really hates Elantrians and is basically anytime like, we should just kill him. And Rathan is trying not to go for this approach because he's trying to have a peaceful conversion instead of a takeover. I really paused because I was thinking about colonialism. But anyway, not about that today. Not like a deep dive into that today, which I would not even be qualified for. But moving on. There's a question I have the whole book, which is, I don't understand why Rathan does not at once try to kill Delof. So all you need to know at this moment is that Rathan is reaffirmed of his faith and he gets 2 vials of poison. This is very important. The first one is good to read, but not relevant to this overall plot summary. But the second one will be important and we'll go over that. So that's where the 3 characters, the first third of the book is setting them up. The second third is resolving their individual thrusts. And so Serene, it basically exposes the king at being very bad at ruling. And we find out the king is doing blood sacrifices. Literally, he's sacrificing people every week. This doesn't go well for him. And he dies by suicide. And we find out at his funeral that he had changed TLDR. He changed the line of succession, and it's announced at his funeral. And so he changed it from the wealth system to hereditary. So that means because Rowden is dead, King Iadon is dead, his wife doesn't have claim to the throne. That means Serene would be the ruler of Arellan. Now, that second vial of poison is not actually poison that kills you. It's poison that makes you appear on the outside as an Elantrian for 5 days. So Rathan actually had poisoned Serene off screen, and the change hits her right when her group is going to take political power. She's thrown into Elantris, and one of the nobles, Torelli is his name, but one of the nobles who did convert to Dareth, takes the throne. So we then switch to Serene getting thrown into Elantris. She reunites with Rowden, who then explains why he was squirreling away more supplies. She's like, understandable, that's a good explanation. She forgives him. They spend time together, they study magic together, and they fall in love. Okay. A small thing I didn't put in my notes. The magic stopped working, kind of. Okay, why did... Okay, they don't explain all the reason that, like, Elantris fell and why the magic stopped working. But basically, 10 years ago, there was this thing that caused a chasm. CHASM. That's a real word. It's just like a weird word. Anyway, it caused a geographical feature called the chasm. So when you do magic, you draw symbols or glyphs or sigils or whatever, or runes, whatever you want to call them, and squigglies. They're in the index. But it's okay if you've ever read like old cookbooks or old manuals. Sometimes things say do X in the usual manner. So the reason that magic doesn't work in Elantris is because before you cast draw whatever you need to draw, you have to draw like a geographical marker for the world map. And the Great Chasm has changed what that is. And so the reason that like nobody, like none of the Elantrians, or I shouldn't say that, why Rowden hasn't figured out how to cast magic is because he didn't know basically you had to preheat the oven. He didn't know you had to preheat the oven. So when Serene is in Elantris for 5 days and she sees him like practicing magic, she's like, oh, like you didn't preheat the oven. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, oh yeah, like we talked a little bit about, they don't use magic in Todd, but it's like an academic study. And she's like, oh yeah, my tutor would always say, did you preheat the magic oven? And like I totally get it, because like that's a loss of information that we experience in the real world, because things we think are obvious we just don't write down because everyone around us knows it and we're not writing necessarily for posterity. So like it's very real, but I'm losing it now, and I lost it back then. I think I stopped reading. I stopped reading and turned to my reading buddy and explained that I had just fucking lost it, and was dramatic. A little bit because of the book, a little bit on purpose. But anyway, in real life, if you don't know me in real life and you're just listening to this on YouTube for the first time, hi, thank you for listening for this last almost hour and a half. But I am pretty dramatic, and I'm dramatic on purpose. So, like, sometimes for fun, you know? Anyway, point being, so Serene helps Rowden crack magic. After 5 days, Serene gets the poison leaves her system. So bada bing, bada boom, she goes back to Arellan. She and the group are trying to figure out what to do, because the guy on the throne is maybe worse than the last guy. So the group is like, I don't know, maybe we need to kill the bitch. Like, maybe we got to assassinate him. Since Rowden, and I'm telling you the order that it is revealed to us, the readers. This is how I experienced it, so this is how I'm passing it on. So if it feels like I'm bouncing from point to point, that's because this whole book is written in 3 alternating POVs. You love it or you hate it, I suppose. Though it doesn't feel this jarring when you get to the end, because you've already been reading it for 500 pages. I would say the climax happens the last 100 pages of the book, if anyone is curious. Okay, so Serene and the group say maybe assassination is the answer. Since Rowden has figured out magic, he basically cast an illusion over himself and Geladon so that they can leave Elantris and like go fix the politics, basically. So when Rowden and Geladon are figuring this out, you remember we only cared about the group by trope. So the old mentor's rival of the old mentor, turned the group in for treason, and he's like, haha, that's how I'll win. So the new king was like, yeah, we won't kill them for treason. So he immediately kills the old mentor in front of the group. Then the rival of the old mentor is like, no, I didn't think this would happen. I respected you. After this killing, murder, assassination, anyway, after this, the head of the army decides, you know what? Peace is not an option, clearly. Like, we're gonna have to do a violent takeover of the government. Before I tell you how that squeezes out, the new king, he has a name. We're just going to call it Telri, but we're just going to say the new king. He basically told Hrathen the new king had converted, and so he told Hrathen, like, yeah, like, because Hrathen backed him financially and politically. Hrathen gave the new king money so that the new king could convert. And so when the new king takes the throne, he's like, psst, I didn't say I was going to listen to you. I just took your money. And the new king actually sent, he basically tries to squeeze the head of religion in the Fjordian Empire. Problem. The Fjordian Empire, the head of the religion in the Fjordian Empire, it's a MLN. You can't just skip up the chain. So, the Fjordian Empire is actually going to take this incredibly personally, and the new king trying to squeeze them for money is going to be bad in a huge way. So, circle back to Serene and the group, and the head of the army said, it's time for a violent revolution. He does succeed in storming the castle and killing the new king, but he is also killed in the same attack. A power vacuum then starts because the old king is dead, the new king is dead, the head of the army is dead, and they don't know that Serene is back yet. So Rowden actually dispels his illusion and says, I'm fucking back, bitch, and I am the king of Elantris. I am the rightful king because it's hereditary now. I should say Rowden actually has two illusions, so he looks like he's normal. He doesn't look like... He still has all of his Elantrian features, the black spots and no hair and rapid aging. But so he's removed one illusion, but not the other. This is a plot point, so I thought I'd clear it up. Okay. The head of the Fjordian Empire religion, the head of Dorethi does not know about Rowden, so Delof takes point. So basically at this point, Hrathen is like lost. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to keep it simple because I have a whole section just called last minute reveals. So Rowden goes to become king, and we find out that Delof, the priest, can dispel magic, and so he shows all of the kingdom that, like, hey, the king is an Elantrian, but Serene has been able to maneuver herself so that people do not see Elantrians as scapegoats. So they're like, you know what? Fine. Sure. Delof takes this real personally, and we find out Delof is not who we thought he was, and that he hates Elantris for personal reasons. Sorry. I'm going to jump forward to this is part of last minute reveals plot twist, and it needs to come up now. So basically, Delof hates Elantris, and he wants to destroy the city. That's why it's been commented that his hate of them is personal. It's because his wife went to Elantris to be healed. The healing fucked up, and changed her to where she, it changed her derogatory, and she was in excruciating pain, and she threw herself off of the gates of Elantris, which did not kill her. And I think it's kind of implied that Dilaf had to kill his own wife because she was just suffering. So he hates Elantris for personal reasons. Now, Dilaf isn't just a priest. It turns out, so Dareth has a bunch of different monasteries. And so Dilaf is actually the head of the monastery of Dakhor, Dakhor. And it turns out that the monastery of Dakhor, I'm adding an apostrophe in my head. Anyway, is that they use blood magic. So they sacrifice priests to buff other priests and give them supernatural strength and abilities depending on what how many people were sacrificed and what ritual. And so Dilaf is actually 70 some years old, the head of this monastery, and that means we've thought that Dilaf was under Rathan in the pyramid scheme, but he's actually way outranks Rathan. And so we find out that Rathan, it didn't matter what Rathan did, he was just a distraction, so people would focus on him while Dilaf was working to destroy Elantris, though Dilaf has been, to this point in the book, foiled by Serene. He also takes that personally. So after Dilaf uses magical nullification to show the people that Rauden is an Elantrian, Serene is able to use her eloquence to make people fine with that. And Dilaf takes that personally. So he kidnaps Serene and teleports to Todd because blood magic. But before that, he orders all the nobles to get rounded up by the other monks and for the city and Elantris to be razed to the ground. So we're going to come back to Dilaf and Serene in a second. Let me tell you what's happening with Rauden, because Rauden's going to intercept. This is the order it's written in. So Rauden is injured, and he reaches his breaking point where the pain is too much. So he goes to get dropped off basically in a magical pool. We're not getting into it for this summary. You'll understand if you read the book. But he has an epiphany, and the epiphany is that just like you need to preheat the magic oven by drawing the chasm on the world map before you can cast magic, Elantris and the cities north, south, east, west of it are a physical sigil for the magic symbol of spirit. And so when that line got disrupted, that ley line, it created that's what caused the fall of Elantris. We don't know how the line got broken, or at least not an Elantris. Some Googling forum posts. Anyway. So Rauden comes to that epiphany. And I noted a quote that I thought was clever foreshadowing. But I guess it's a lot of wordplay. I'm going to tell you that Sanderson is thinking about things ahead of time, and is dropping foreshadowing. But I'll break it down, though it might be kind of a boring thing to hear just because it's wordplay. So he says, Rauden says, quote, okay, I should explain. Rauden, so most of the names in Elantris are a magic symbol or meaning, and then some other letters. So for example, Rauden, Rao, R-A-O, is spirit. So And that's the name that he takes on in Elantris. He just takes on the name Spirit, which is the sort of the common way of saying Rao. So this is the quote, and I think it's clever, is he should no more be separated from Elantris than his spirit would be separated from his body. Because it is only when Rowden literally almost becomes one with the city that he realizes it's missing its spirit, which is a play on his own name, and the city is in the shape of his spirit. So it's saying, just like his spirit cannot be separated from his body, right? That Elantris cannot be separated from, he should no more be separated from Elantris than his spirit would be separated from his body. Similarly, that his body needs his spirit, Elantris needs Rowden, but also Rowden is spirit. Therefore, saying Elantris needs spirit, like the word, the Aeon, the magic word for spirit, it needs its Rao, so it needs the ley line completed. Again, that's probably like kind of boring to hear because you're just listening to me give you a plot summary, but I did enjoy reading that like line. I mean, I jotted it down in my notebook. All the quotes that you've gotten here are things that as I was reading I thought were good enough to get jotted down. So back to the plot summary. So Delof, boom, teleported off with Serene to Todd because he's going to use her as a bargaining chip to force Todd, which is the only like government that hasn't converted to Dareth and folded into the Fjordan Empire. He's going to use Serene as a bargaining chip. Rowden connects the ley line of Elantris to the other city. And so the Elantrians that had only partially transformed are now in their splendor. So now Rowden has unlocked magic, baby! Okay, I got kind of excited about that. Put a pin in it. So, Serene and back to Serene. So, Serene and Rathan were teleported to Todd. They break off from Delof. There was a priest earlier. We're not getting into it, but Rathan fired him. That guy took it personally, and he basically knifes Rathan. Serene. Sorry, there was a note I had, and I just need to know if. Okay, got it. Rathan is stabbed, and Serene is like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, you're gonna die." And spoiler, he's not dead yet. But Serene goes to try to like get out of Todd and is found by Delof. Right before Delof kills her, Rowden uses his magic to teleport to where they are and basically just like Kamehamehas them. I'm not kidding. He really just like kills him. Why do we say that? I mean, it's because it's from Dragon Ball. Kamehameha. But like, where did Dragon Ball get it from? See, now I want to like find out why that is what they say in Dragon Ball. And I feel like we're in this together, but weird. Okay, all that to say, Rowden can do magic energy blasts, and he does that. He doesn't have enough people. Geladon, actually, who's been studying magic with Rowden, though just kind of like cynically, he teleports Galadon and the other Elantrians, and they also just energy blast a lot of the remaining monks. Delof tries to kill Serene and Rowden because Delof has some magic nullification abilities because he had 50 people die to give him that ability because blood magic. And Rathan actually did not die. I told you it would come back in a big way. Because, as I noted way back when you were with me way an hour ago, Rathan has been wearing armor this whole time. And so when he got stabbed, it did a lot of damage, but it didn't kill him out like instantly. And so we find out that like Rathan had been at the same monastery that Dilof is from, but he was too soft for it. But he had done some of the rituals. So we find out that Rathan's really strong and his arms are more durable. And so he basically picks Dilof up by his neck, chokes, and like snaps his neck before succumbing to his stab wounds. And then we jump forward a couple days ago, and Rowden takes the throne with Serene, and everything, you know, they're gonna fix Arellan, and there are plot threads that could be picked up, and I am pretty sure Sanderson is writing a sequel to Elantris. So some of these plot threads that I'm not like saying like they're alluded to, like it's outright stated in the last couple pages of the book is, did I note here? Sorry. I thought I had noted it down, but no, I guess not. The main couple get married. Serene says she can't wait to fuck. I'm not kidding. And Rowden and Serene set up a graveyard for some of the major characters who died during the book, including Rathan, who they say basically to remember as a hero, because if not, they would have been dead in that final moment. We're going to back up a little. These are things that are all revealed literally in the last 100 pages. Some of them like the last 50 pages. And I'm not saying you can't have a last minute reveal. I'm just saying these are too many, and there's just too many. I'm even debating right now which one of these are important for these purposes, because some of these characters have literally not been important, and I ain't just gonna go read. You know, I'm actually gonna omit this section. I'm making an executive decision. I mentioned way back when that Rathan was going to be a round character because the religion's three branches were unity, obedience, and love. And the text directly calls back to this in the last part of the confrontation, where most of the book he's been obedience. And then after Dilof kind of shows his true colors, he's unity with Serene, unity of purpose, trying to stay alive and get her out of Dilof's grasp. And then we find out in the ending part of his narration and his point of view that he did love Serene, which I'm okay with. I've joked a lot of the book that Serene and Rathan should just fuck, and that's also just how I am in general with reading, but I don't think it comes out of left field or anything that Rathan says he fell in love with Serene, because I think it's consistent with how Elantris is depicting love. I would say romantic love in Elantris is somebody who sees you and you see them. And so Rathan's ends his section before he dies saying he's seen Serene, and Serene in her internal monologue like says how she doesn't know even now after his death like anything about Rathan. So I think it's melancholy. I don't know. I think Sanderson actually did a really good job of writing unrequited love without it being overt or creepy or entitled. As Hrathen's last thing he sees when he's dying is Serene and Rowden after he kills Delof, and he like is at peace and understanding that they love each other. So there was a reason I told you this. Yes, so Hrathen is character, I put character progression speedrun, is that his themes, obedience to unity to love, also mirror the 3 different religions. I'll give you my last couple of notes about Elantris. I know we've been here for a while. Sanderson is really good at giving most of the main characters at least 2 other characters who you can compare them to as a lens of further analysis. And I'll just kind of note what I thought some of the comparisons are if you're interested in maybe paying attention to it on your own read of Elantris. Sorry, I knocked over a can. So Serene is opposed ideologically to Delof on what you think of Elantrians, which might be a commentary on how we perceive others. There's an idea in like academia about like our in-group, out-group, and how humans will tend to what's sort of called othering people who aren't in the same group. So I think Delof and Serene could be a commentary on how do we treat people we perceive in our out-group. Serene can also be compared with Hrathen, because Hrathen falls more in the argument about religion versus faith, which is religion as seen as sort of more structured steps and rituals and ways to do things, versus faith, which is more characterized in that argument as like internal feeling. Hrathen and Serene are on different spectrums of religion versus faith. Rowden can be compared to Geladon, as Geladon is his opposite in personality and outlook. And Rowden is actually opposed to Delof's leadership style. Delof says on page 582 basically that like sometimes you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. Delof says people should fear you, and sometimes you have to use force to make people listen to you, where Rowden believes in the goodness of other men and believes in people's ability to choose for himself. I don't think it's the most effective comparison, just because we don't find out that these two can even be compared until page 582 of 614, but take it for what you will. And Hrathen can be compared to a couple of different people. I've already mentioned Serene, of course, but he can also be compared to Dila, because there's the 3 branches or offshoots of that same religion of Keseg. He can be compared with, in his religion, to Delof, who's a fiery member of Dareth. He can be compared to Omen, who's a minor character who's a Korathi priest. And Hrathen also is compared against Delof in what is our religion supposed to look like. Oh, that quote I mentioned for Delof and his leadership style I had put here. So this is also something Hrathen disagrees with and Rowden would disagree with. But Delof says, quote, absolute obedience is required, Hrathen. Occasional tests and examples bring loyalty from the rest. So I think Hrathen would be more interesting the Hrathen Delof would be more interesting if it came up earlier in the text, but I think that's something that suffers from having 3 POV characters. I just put a note on Rowden that says Rule of Irelin. I found those quotes I had about Rathan and his love for Serene. And I'll read them, and if more comes to me than what I said, I will let you know. But if not, I will just... I do like the book. I mean, I like how it was written. Let me read this in my head before it commits. But... yeah. I'll let you read those on your own. Again, I do think that Sanderson does a good balance of... it doesn't feel out of left field that Rathan loves Serene. And I think he did it justice by, after Rathan died, he didn't have Serene be like, oh, I knew he loved me or anything, which would have felt undeserved. Not undeserved, but it wouldn't have felt... it would have felt it would have felt like it came out of left field if after Rathan died, if Serena's like, oh, well, I knew he had feelings for me because we hadn't seen it as an author. So I won't read any of the quotes because I've talked about that, but I do think it was executed well. My last notes, again, thank you for sticking with this, is subsection, not a great look. Alternate title, Sanderson, I want to talk. As I mentioned earlier, I don't understand why Rowden was the first person in 10 years in Elantris to try to change things. And it really did hamper my ability to enjoy his POV. Likewise, how he's written as the smart guy. I don't understand why Rathan never had to have Delof killed. Now, I know when the book ends that if Rathan tried to have Delof killed, it just wouldn't have worked because Delof has those magic... because Delof has those magic enhancements. But Rathan doesn't know that as we go through the book. And I think it's just because Rathan as a character, I think, is supposed to read as like, would never do something. See, I want to be like, would never do something underhanded, like assassinate somebody. But Rathan is fine poisoning people. So it's a little hard to say for me. So what am I telling you? I'm saying I multiple times told my reading buddy, hi, I don't know why he doesn't just kill the bitch. Why? Because the book is in basically the medieval times and there was no criminology and there's no way Rathan could have just hired somebody to like kill Delof. And I know that the reason he can't hire somebody to kill Delof is because, well, if somebody who's hired to kill Delof and then they fail, it'll like trigger that part of the plot early. But maybe that's not a bad thing. But it would be a different book, I suppose. I can only think about the book we may have had, not the book we do have. But it just doesn't make sense that Sanderson never brings up why does he not just have somebody kill Delof? Like, it's glaring in the fact that it's never brought up, so I feel like something would have been there. We thought the whole time when we understood Rathan was wearing armor, turns out the other characters thought he was wearing fake armor. Apparently Derethi priests are supposed to be wearing armor, and they do wear armor, but like in D&D, where if you wear armor every day, you'll get fatigue. Like, it's a fucking pain. So we find out that most of the Derethi priests are wearing fake armor. So when Rathan is stabbed, it doesn't kill him because he's wearing his armor. And it does shock all the other all the other people. So I found that interesting because I just totally thought it was real. My last note is there's one, and I'm gonna keep going, and that's okay because there was more on some of our secondary characters, and I've decided that since I just didn't talk about them, that I'm not gonna get into some of the problems with some of the characters. Feel free to comment if you want to get into Serene's family tree. If you want to get into the problems I have with some of Serene's families and the last minute reveals, let me know. I could do my own mini podcast, a mini cast, a half-hour cast, sure, an hour cast. I could keep going about Serene's family, why there's potential, how it was missed, and the last minute reveals are kind of wild in the sense it's like they're not adding anything. So why do we have them? My last subsection, alternate title, Sanderson, I want to talk. Elantris has a lot of characters, and each characters are given detail when they're introduced, which is fantastic. It makes it very difficult to it makes it incredibly difficult to pin. There is a Discord chat I am in, and it is going in the background, and let me just mute that server. Okay, thank you for your patience. Okay. There's a lot of characters in Elantris, and they're all introduced with their physical description and their position in society and like some of their general beliefs, and it makes it hard to tell which characters are going to be important and which characters are like incredibly minor and you'll only see a couple times. And I don't know if this is something Sanderson gets better with over time, but I just wish there was a better way to kind of tell different people or what characters will matter more than others. And when I say there's a lot of characters, I mean there's a lot of characters. I will name you characters I can think of off the top of my head that just, it would have been a whole thing to get into. There's Rowden, Geladon, Kurata, Salin, Marsh, Shower, Shaor, Tane. There's even more. That's like 7 people, and like I said, there's more, but that's 7 alone in Rowden. Then you've got like Serene, Rial, Ahan, Shudon, Iandel, and then her family tree. So you've got her father, you've got Eventau, Ken, Deora, Lukul, Aiden, Hala, Kaisa, Dowrin. That's 8. That's more than 8. I'm using one hand. You've got Rathan. Rathan has the least characters, actually. You've got Rathan, Delof, Omen, John, Ash, another walkie-talkie. There were a lot of characters. Different character. This is Serene's. Terena, Eshel. There are more. So I just wish the book was better at telling us who's relevant and who's not. So my final thoughts on Elantris. It was a solid read, and when it hit and started converging, it was a fast read, but it just spends too long with the setup, and that absolutely is a result of having so many POV characters. So I would say give it a read if you're okay with flat characters. It's not dense, and it is chronological, but give it a shot. Would I recommend it as like a Sanderson work to get started? I don't know. I think I'll read Warbreaker or one of the other one-shots and get back to you, but I'm not mad at the time I spent with Elantris. And I did enjoy my time with Elantris, even if sometimes it was very dramatic and frustrating, and I found it a little dumb in a convoluted way. But sometimes it can be just good to get lost in a fantasy setting. And I would say the moments and the enjoyment I had where I didn't want to put the book down were worth the moment where I really wanted to just like stop reading it. So I'd say I'd give Elantris a rating of a fond time. Next on my list of books to read is The Disassembly of Doreen Durand by Ryan Collett. So I started that earlier today. I'm about on page 20, and it's a smaller book, less than 300 pages, and much larger font. So hopefully I'll see some of you then, and if not, thank you for joining me today, and I wish you all the best. Take care.